56. Welcome to the evening service of Immanuel Baptist Church. We'll be singing song number 56, O Come All Ye Faithful.
Turn in your Bibles with me to Mark chapter 3. It's Mark chapter 3. We are moving right along in our study. I mean, it took us forever to make it through chapter 1, but we just blew right through chapter 2. Now, the goal isn't to cruise through the material so much as it is to understand what it's all about, right? So whatever it takes, whatever pace it takes to get the right understanding. But last chapter, we saw Jesus' increase in popularity in ministry. Before he was kind of a nobody. Before he had to go to all of the villages, and they didn't really know who he was until he started preaching and doing miracles. And then they're like, oh, wow, this is an interesting person. But now he's got a following. People are following him around. He's attracting attention from the big city of Jerusalem. He's got the religious leaders who are increasing scrutiny on him. And Jesus is... now he's got a following. Now he's got some popularity. Now he's got some publicity. People know who he is, and they're hearing about him. Before, while the masses, they were willing to take whatever Jesus had to say, at face value, simply because he did miracles. But now that he's getting the scrutiny of these religious leaders, who they're not impressed by miracles so much as they want to know, is this guy one of us, or is he going to upset the apple cart? So they questioned Jesus, his ministry, his teachings. They wanted to know what he was teaching and what he was doing and how he was going about doing it. And some of the things that he did and said seemed rather outrageous to them. It was their responsibility to make sure that there wasn't a heretic going around leading people astray. But the problem was that their own doctrine had been corrupted by man's teachings. And so they really didn't have a good point of reference. And so they see Jesus, they see that he's different, they see that he is rather dismissive of their own rules and traditions and ways of doing things, and they're a little bit jealous, it seems, of the popularity that he's getting, and they don't like what's going on, and they've been very questioning of Jesus. And in chapter 2, we don't see any open antagonism. We see some questioning, we see some skepticism, but we don't see any sort of open antagonism. But in chapter 3, we find that that suddenly now things are going to change. There's going to be a big shift here in the beginning of chapter 3, because no longer are these scribes and Pharisees just content to stand on the sidelines and be questioning and be skeptical. They are going to take active measures to try to trip Jesus up, to try to topple him from this new popularity that he has. They don't like what they see, and they think, well, we can take care of this guy. He's not one of us, and now we've got a plan. They've got a plan to trip Jesus up, because they don't like how Jesus is dismissive of their traditions. He seems to think that their traditions are inappropriate, erroneous, and irrelevant. And that really didn't make them feel good about it themselves. This caused the religious leaders to become Jesus' enemies. Yet today we will see that the malice of God's enemies is powerless to prevent his ministry. So let's read our passage. We'll start in verse 1 of chapter 3, and we'll read through verse 12. And it says, "And he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. And he saith unto the man which had the withered hand, Stand forth. And he saith unto them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, Stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth, and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. But Jesus withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and from beyond Jordan. And they about Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude, when they had heard what great things he did, came unto him. And he spake to his disciples that a small ship should wait on him because of the multitude, lest they should throng him. For he had healed many, insomuch that they pressed upon him for to touch him, as many as had plagues. And unclean spirits, when they saw him, fell down before him and cried, Thou art the Son of God. And he straitly charged them that they should not make him known. Jesus has been teaching for a while, and he has a regular pattern for ministry. He goes to the synagogue to preach. He performs a miracle to verify his message, and then cares for the needs of the multitude by healing people and by casting out demons and by teaching them what he has to say. And in the first part of this passage that we just looked at, Jesus is doing his regular thing. He goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, but the Pharisees are already there, and they have a plan. They want to discredit this upstart teacher who treats them and their authority as insignificant, whose ministry is an affront to their pride, and who has won the admiration of all these multitudes of the lower class, and they have a plan. They have a plan. At the synagogue is a man with a withered hand, meaning his hand was paralyzed somehow, and it looked shriveled up. And maybe he was born with this shriveled hand. Maybe he broke his hand and it healed wrong. Or maybe his hand was burned badly and that's how it shriveled up. Maybe his tendons were severed somehow and he lost control of his hand and it became emaciated. We don't really know why this man has a withered hand, but the Pharisees know this guy is going to be at the synagogue. And they know Jesus' regular pattern. They know that Jesus, when he comes to the synagogue, he'll preach a message and he'll probably heal the man with the withered hand. He'll heal the most conspicuous person who has an ailment because this is Jesus' method. He preaches a message, he does a miracle to verify his message, and then he continues his ministry. Now that he has proven himself, people accept him, and he continues ministering to the people. And the Pharisees know what Jesus' regular practice is. They know that he will probably heal this man with the withered hand on the Sabbath day in the synagogue. They knew that Jesus would do it because it's his regular practice, and he's done miracles on the Sabbath before. His first miracle was to cast out a demon in the synagogue on a Sabbath day. And then the second miracle that's recorded here in Mark is when he heals Peter's mother-in-law on the Sabbath day. They know that Jesus will do this. They know that this is his regular pattern. They know that they can catch him at this point. They felt that they knew what to expect from Jesus when he comes in and does what he always does. And then they could spring an accusation on him. An accusation that should stick. The Pharisees planned on accusing Jesus of violating the Jewish law when he had healed the man with the withered hand on the Sabbath. One of the most conspicuous laws in the Ten Commandments was remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And part of that was you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day. You were not supposed to work on the Sabbath day because that is a holy day. It's a day that you're supposed to set apart for the worship of God. You're not supposed to work. And the Pharisees, as with everything else that was in the law, they took this law and they took it to an extreme. They're like, you know what? You can't work on the Sabbath day, and something that is working is if you destruction, demolition, that's working, right? If you destroy something, you are doing demolition, which is working on the Sabbath day. And pulling out a gray hair from your head would be demolition on the Sabbath day if you pulled it out of pulled a gray hair on the Sabbath day. Or so you couldn't open an umbrella, or you couldn't pull out a hair because those were construction or demolition. And the Pharisees, they had a rule about healing on the Sabbath also. If it wasn't life-threatening, if it wasn't a life-threatening condition, a doctor or a healer couldn't care for someone on the Sabbath because that was work. That's their job. That's part of what they do on a regular profane day. So you can't do that on the holy day. You can't heal people on a holy day unless it's life-threatening. And this man with the withered hand evidently has had this for a long time. This isn't a condition that he hasn't had for a long time. It's not like it's going to cause him to die tomorrow or before tomorrow. So it's not a life-threatening condition. So they can accuse him. They're thinking in their minds, we can accuse him of breaking the law, of working on the Sabbath day, if he heals this man with the withered hand on the Sabbath day in the synagogue of all places. And so the Pharisees, they had a plan. So what happens? Well, Jesus, he enters the synagogue as expected. He's confronted with the man with the withered hand as planned. And Jesus begins his message, but his lesson is totally unexpected. Jesus asks the man with the withered hand to stand up in the middle of the crowd, and then he asks the crowd a question. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil, to save a life, or to kill? Well, that seems like a pretty self-explanatory question. If you have the choice between doing something that is good on the Sabbath day or doing something that is evil on the Sabbath day, then obviously you should do the good thing, right? You don't want to do evil on the Sabbath day, because even if it was work, it would be better to do the good thing than to do the bad thing on the Sabbath day, because it's a holy day, right? It's self-explanatory. It's a rhetorical question. The Pharisees don't even try to answer it. The Pharisees, they had a plan. It was simple but effective. Jesus does what he always does. They spring a surprise attack on him, get the people riled up, and end the popularity of this new teacher by discrediting him as someone who breaks the law. But Jesus, he anticipates them. He asks them a question that they can't answer without invalidating their own position or without validating Jesus' position. If they answer this question, they're going to either make themselves look really bad, or they're going to prove Jesus correct. They don't bother answering the question because it's rhetorical, it's self-explanatory, but also because if they said anything, they would look really stupid. And Jesus, he asks them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? See, Jesus is faced with a decision here because he has the capability of healing this man, right? Everybody knows it. Nobody questions it. Even the Pharisees don't question whether or not he has the ability to heal. That's been verified already. Jesus, though, has a decision. Does he do nothing to help this man with a crippled hand? Back in this day, if you had a crippled hand, most manual labor takes two hands, right? Most manual labor takes two hands, but if you have a crippled hand, then you are also a lot less valuable as a worker. And your ability to provide for your family is going to be affected. And Jesus here has an opportunity to help this man, to do good for this man. But in this case, to do nothing, wouldn't that be a horrible thing? If you had the ability to heal a man's hand and restore him to the ability to take care of his family, to provide for himself and his loved ones, to go through life without the stigmatism of being a cripple, because we've discussed in previous passages how those who are crippled were looked down on in this society because they thought, well, they must have done something wrong. They must have sinned somehow to deserve to be crippled like this. This man is going through life with the shame of being a cripple and the inability to fully be functional and work in society. If Jesus heals him, that would be a wonderful thing. That would be a good thing. But if Jesus, who has the ability to help this man, does nothing for this man, that would be a bad thing, wouldn't it? So now Jesus is faced with a question. Is it better to do good on the Sabbath day or to do bad on the Sabbath day? Because, it's not a neutral position. Jesus doesn't have this middle course that he can take. He either does something good or he does something bad by not helping this man. So the Pharisees, they certainly can't say it's better to do evil deeds than good deeds on the Sabbath. But if they say, well, it's better to do good deeds, then they have to concede that that he was right and that they are wrong because, Jesus has the opportunity to heal this man. So what happens? Well, the Pharisees, they choose to say nothing, right? They're not, they neither confirm nor deny the righteousness of Jesus' position. And this makes Jesus angry. We don't find too many times in the Bible where Jesus gets angry about something. But when we do, it's usually the hardness of men's hearts. Here, Jesus is upset because, not just because they refused to agree with him, but because they chose their pride over the welfare of this crippled man. He says, it says, he looked round about on them with anger and being grieved for the hardness of their hearts. Jesus was angry with these proud, hypocritical, religious bigots. They would rather stubbornly refuse to admit that they were wrong than allow for a man with a withered hand to be healed. That's what it comes down to. They would rather be right than help another person. And they did not care about this man with the withered hand. They did not care that he couldn't provide for his family adequately. They didn't care that he had this the being looked down on because he was a cripple. They didn't care that he probably would rather have his own hand, have two hands than one hand. They didn't care about this guy. They were trying to prove their point, and they failed, and they were upset about it, and they were stewing in their anger, but they weren't going to admit that they were wrong. And that the hardness of their hearts angers Jesus. But, Jesus, he doesn't let his flesh take control. He doesn't lash out at these folks. Yes, he's angry at the hardness of their hearts, but what does he do? He doesn't bother with them anymore. He turns to the man with the withered hand, and he tells him, "Stretch forth thine hand." And as the man did what Jesus said, his hand was healed. This is one of my favorite miracles because you can't fake this. The man's hand is visibly withered, and he's standing in the middle of the crowd, and everybody probably knows who he is, and he stretches out his hand in front of everybody, and it's healed as everybody is looking at it. You can't fake that. Sure, if you're making a Hollywood movie, you could probably CGI it, but that's not real, and it only works on your screen. You can't do something like that in the middle of a crowd. Even Jesus's opponents here, the Pharisees who are wanting to do something to trip him up, can't deny the fact that a miracle just happened, that Jesus just did this, that this man's hand was withered, it was crippled, he couldn't do anything with it, and now it is whole. And there are a lot of charlatans out there today who will try to tell you that they can do some miracles, but the fact is, they can't stand up to actual scrutiny. But Jesus could. You could look at any of his miracles that he did, and they were genuine. They were all real. And Jesus proves who he was by the miracles that he did, the fact that they were undeniable. And at this particular miracle, he had the Pharisees stumped. Not only could they not deny that he just did a miracle, but they couldn't get him in trouble for doing it like they had planned on it. They planned on ambushing Jesus, and instead they walked into their own trap. They had set up a trap for themselves, and they looked like speechless fools in front of the very people they thought they could manipulate into overthrowing this upstart teacher. The very people that they thought that they could get to oust Jesus from his popularity are the people that they looked like fools in front of. And up till now, Jesus and the Pharisees, they had no real quarrel. There was some skepticism, there was a little bit of friction, but they had no real quarrel. The previous questioning that had been done by the scribes and Pharisees was perfectly natural and acceptable. But now they had intentionally tried to trip up Jesus. Jesus artfully made them look like a bunch of fools. And now there was a clear line between Jesus and his followers and the Pharisees. And for the Pharisees, it was war. Now they are really out to get Jesus. It says that the Pharisees, they immediately went forth and took counsel with the Herodians about how they could destroy Jesus. Now, very little is known about the Herodians. They're not really mentioned very much outside of the Bible. Only Josephus really mentions Herodians. But they were not a religious group. The Herodians were not a religious group. They were a political group. They were usually pretty much the rich elite who prospered from the reign of the Herods. Starting with Herod the Great, going right on down the several tetrarchs and Agrippa. So the Herodians, they were supporters of the Herodian dynasty. They were supporters of probably the Roman occupation, because it was the Romans who gave Herod his power. They were not the people who were popular with the lower class. They were not what you might call nationalists. They were the oligarchy. They were the rich elite. They were the people who prospered off of the status quo, and they were not really patriots. Which was funny that the Pharisees should choose to talk with these people, because the Pharisees were supposed to represent the more nationalistic, the more patriotic group and the more religious group in Judea, in that area. The Herodians, they're more secular, they're more political, and they're for the status quo, and they support Rome and the Herods, and the Pharisees, on the other end, are usually identified with somewhat opposed to all of that. They're religious, they're patriotic, they're for the people, etc. But here they show the depths of their hypocrisy, because not only are they on the, Jesus, he says, what is better to do on the Sabbath day, to do good or to do evil? And here the Pharisees, they go and they do evil. Jesus does good on the Sabbath day. He heals a man. But the Pharisees, they go plot to kill Jesus. And they do it with people who should be their natural enemies. People who they shouldn't be associating with. They just show the depths of their hypocrisy. They do evil on the Sabbath, and they do it with people that are more opposed to what they claim to stand for. So it's one of the most ironic moments in the New Testament. These supposedly religious holy men desire to condemn a man for doing good on the holy Sabbath day, while they plot to do evil against the doer of good. And they really demonstrate how corrupt and how really useless they are. And while the frustrated Pharisees, they further expose their corruption by conspiring with their political enemies to destroy Jesus, Jesus takes his disciples away and separates himself from the Pharisees. He leaves the synagogue. It says, but Jesus withdrew himself and his disciples to the sea. He leaves the synagogue where the Pharisees are, and he goes down to the waterfront, and he gets his disciples to row a boat out into the water, and he preaches his message from there. He's done with these Pharisees. He's done with these hypocrites, these heartless people who don't really care about the people they claim to be the shepherds of. These people who have such hard hearts and such pride that they won't admit that they're wrong, and they won't help a man in need just because of their pride. And Jesus is done with these folks, and so he withdraws from the synagogue. He withdraws from the Pharisees. And he goes down to the waterfront, and he teaches his disciples there. The Pharisees, they've exposed themselves with their own corruption, and now that they are exposed, Jesus takes his disciples elsewhere. Have you ever seen the old black and white movie, 12 Angry Men? Anybody? Am I the only one who has seen it? Now, I'm sure there's several people who have probably seen it. The play version sometimes goes by 12 angry jurors. And in both the play and in the movie, there are 12 jurors deliberating in a room. They're discussing the possible guilt of a young man in a crime that could send him to the electric chair. And the jurors are discussing why they feel the young man is innocent or guilty. And juror, I think number 10, goes on a bigoted rant about young people and about how, guilty or not guilty, they should just send him to the electric chair to send a message to all of these miscreants who are in gangs and causing problems. And everybody's shocked. This man who is a juror, he's claimed to be impartial, he's claimed to be objective, he's claimed to be someone who can look at this objectively and come to a decision and make a decision that would, determine the fate of this young man's life. He demonstrates his hypocrisy and his hard-heartedness in front of everyone, and as a result, one of the other jurors tells him, "Shut up, you can't talk anymore." And for the rest of the movie, he has no real input because he's proven that he doesn't actually have the person at heart. He doesn't have the right heart. He's a hypocrite. He is bigoted. He is self-interested. He wants the decision that would appeal to his emotions most. He doesn't actually care about this young man who could be electrocuted to death. Here, to Jesus, the Pharisees, they had no more to say. Up till now, he's tolerated their questions. All right, they question, why do you eat with publicans and sinners? Why do you let your disciples do on the Sabbath day, which is not lawful? Why do you do anything that you do? Why do you say that you can forgive sins? Jesus has tolerated their questions up to a point, but these folks have exposed themselves. They are hypocrites. They don't actually care about the people. They are only self-interested. They only want what they can get out of this, and they are only opposed to Jesus because Jesus threatens their pride. And in Jesus' point of view, these guys, they have nothing more to say, nothing more worthwhile to listen to. And from now on, we're going to see a shift in Jesus' attitude towards the Pharisees. There's going to be a lot more friction. The Pharisees are going to continually try to trip up Jesus, and Jesus is going to confront the Pharisees on their hypocrisy. The Pharisees, they have nothing more to say in Jesus' opinion, and he takes his disciples away from them, and he is now officially doing his own ministry. He is now separating himself from these hypocrites. And we end with this contrast. The Pharisees are exposed. Their selfish motives are thwarted, and they go off to corrupt themselves more by conspiring with their enemies on how to destroy this man who's exposed them on the Sabbath day. Well, Jesus takes his disciples, puts even more distance between him and these selfish hypocrites who have discredited themselves in his eyes, and his heartfelt ministry of love and compassion and good deeds grows, while the insincere Pharisees diminish further in importance. And we see a classic demonstration of how love and sincerity and good deeds will always triumph over evil, while those with selfish motivations will always be exposed for who they are. And that leaves us with a question. If we were to place ourselves in this story, who would we be? Would we be sincere, loving individuals who place other people's cares and needs above our own? Or would we be exposed for being selfishly motivated in the things that we do? I remember a time when I had a particularly troublesome person in my life. And, I started praying that they would change and get things right so that I would no longer have to deal with these people. That I would no longer have to deal with the pain that they were causing me. And the Lord worked on me about that. He says, you got the wrong motives in praying for these people. Yes, you're praying the right thing, that they get right with me, but you're not praying for the right reasons. Your motives are rather selfish in this matter. And so I prayed that the Lord would change their hearts so they would stop hurting other people's, because I wasn't the only person that they were a pain to. The Lord worked on me about that too. He says, oh, that's a little better than the last time, but that's still not, and you're still not there. It was better, but it was not out of a heart of love. So I prayed again that the Lord would change their heart so that they themselves could be rid of the hurt that they were causing themselves, because they were, not only were they a pain to me, not only were they a pain to everyone else, but people who are like that usually are causing their own problems too. And so I will pray that they will change so that they stop hurting themselves. But the Lord worked on me even further. He says, that's better than where you started, but I still had to pray one more time for the person, that the Lord would help them so that they would no longer hurt God, so that they could enjoy close fellowship with God, so that they could enjoy close fellowship with the other believers, because that's what we're supposed to do. and I had to start caring about that person in the right way, not just the way it worked out best for me or for the people that I cared about, but to care about that person and their relationship with God. And it changed the way I pray for people. And your motivations, they matter. All along I was praying for the right thing, that they would get right with God and that they would do the right things, but my motives were wrong. And sometimes we get caught up in doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. And when it comes down to it, if that's our motivation, if we have the wrong motivation, when we're put in a tough spot, we'll then do the wrong thing to get what we want. Just like these Pharisees. I'm sure that if it had been a weekday, they might have given this man some alms, the best that they could do. But when it came down to sacrificing their pride to help out this man, they were not willing to sacrifice their pride, because the only reason why they would have helped this man to begin with was it would have made them look good. They only cared about their pride. And if you have the wrong motivations in the things that you're doing, even if you're doing the right things, when the rubber hits the road, when you come into a situation where where you need the right motives to do the right thing, you're going to fail. And so God wants you to have the right motives in the things that you do. He doesn't want you to end up like the Pharisees, who were exposed for being hypocrites. He wants you to be like Jesus, who is sincere and heartfelt in the things that he did, who is loving and kind, and gave of himself and sacrificed of himself for other people. Your motivations, they matter. If your motives are wrong for what you're doing, even if it seems to be what you seem to be doing is right, your selfishness will be exposed in the end. But if you're motivated by selflessness and loving sincerity like Jesus was, what you do will always flourish. So let's be like Jesus. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness to us and how you have been the example for us of not just what to do and what is right to do, but of the right motives to do them with. Help us, Father, to when we do things for others, to seek out the motivations for everything that we do. Are we motivated out of love and care for that person and their walk with God and God's relationship with them, or are we motivated out of selfish things, the things that we want to see done? Lord, help us to have the right motives in all that we do and to be like your Son, Jesus. In Christ's name, amen.